Okay, here we go. The session is now recording. Welcome again, everyone, to the Winter Teaching SIG Lightning Talks. The presenters are going to introduce themselves. My name is Anna Boutin-Cooper. I'm the Research and Visual Arts Librarian at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So to get us started, we have Maggie and Dan. Why don't you all take it away?
Maggie, I think you're mute.
Yeah, I also didn't, sorry, I have to reshare and click the button for sharing sound. So share sound. Okay. There we go. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so we're calling this Get Outside the Box and talking about algorithms and inspiration in the creative research process. So hi, we're Maggie and Dan. I'm an assistant professor and visual art and humanities librarian at UNC Greensboro University Libraries. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dan Hale. I'm the visiting assistant professor of animation here at UNCG, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And we acknowledge that the land that we're gathered on in Greensboro has long served as the site of meeting and exchange amongst a number of Indigenous peoples, specifically the Kiawe and Sora. So we're going to give you some background on our collaboration this semester, and then we'll get into sharing some of Dan's student work with you, which I hope you will enjoy. So Dan, tell us about this assignment.
Sure. So this assignment was based on the 1992 short film Mona Lisa Descending a Staircase by Joan C. Gratz. The film won Best Animated Short at the Academy Awards that year, so I'm sure you guys are all familiar with it. But it's an amazing work. It's about 7 minutes long, and essentially just kind of transitions from through a number of different famous paintings from Da Vinci, Van Gogh, Picasso, and the like. So that was kind of the foundation for the assignment, right? Like I wanted my students to see the animated work. And then also I wanted us to kind of like do something like this together, like a collective project where we were all kind of involved in the same collaboration. And so the students were asked to each choose a contemporary artist whose work they admired, but who they were not familiar with already. So they were going to have to do some research, and then they would research this artist, the medium that they worked in, their materials, their process, and then they had to present to the class information about that artist. And then finally, they were to create an image that was their own interpretation of that artist's work. So they were supposed to kind of take information from that artist and then build something that was their own. So not a precise replica, but something that definitely showed like strokes of that artist in their presentation.
And I'm just going to share just a couple of seconds of Mona Lisa Descending a Staircase so that you get a sense of what this looks like if you've never seen it before. And she painted this, right, Dan? She painted the frames?
She paints with clay, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Quite creative process. So it took 8 years of planning and 2 years of creative work to produce the 7-minute long film.
Yeah. But so you get the sense that it's transitioning from kind of recognizable image or image in the style of an artist. Okay. Oh, apparently it's gonna just keep trying to play. There we go. So Dan and I talked about this assignment and thinking, about what kinds of questions this kind of assignment would generate for students. I like to use the art, architecture, and design competencies when I'm thinking about research workshops. And so the sort of things that came up from the essential questions of that document. Where can you find information on historic and contemporary artists and designers working in media or conceptual themes similar to your own? Where should you start exploring new ideas? How do you determine whether a resource meets a particular information need? In this case, like a contemporary 2D artist. How can you tell that, you know, what you're looking for? But we have sort of been coming up against what I'm calling here the problem, but just sort of like a pattern that we're noticing working with studio art and new media and design animation students, is that we will ask them to find images or show us something that inspires them, and it looks a lot like what they are making. And oftentimes it comes from Instagram or ArtStation or DeviantArt, which are algorithmically driven platforms. So I have my own Instagram Explore feed here. And just to, you know, this is stuff that I like. You know, I brought, so you can see, here's a linoleum block that I am carving right now. And there's a linoleum block, you know, in the feed. I have the same highlights that that person does. I have over here, I don't know if, let's see, a stained glass of a rabbit jumping in front of a moon. And there's like a little ceramic of the moon cycle. You know, this represents stuff that I already like. You know, it's just showing me more of what I like. And so we're noticing that what is happening is that students aren't really getting kind of holistic exposure to visual culture because they are seeing more and more of what they already like. And so I'm sort of positing that this is kind of limiting opportunities for serendipity and kind of new ideas, new inspiration when they are limiting themselves to these algorithmic environments, which is not to say that they don't have benefits. And we talk about this explicitly with students. You know, that anyone can share their work. It helps them find communities. You know, there are many benefits to social media, but that it should not be their only technique for finding things. So in case you're not familiar with ArtStation, I also took a screenshot visiting it with like cleared cache, cleared cookies, not logged in. And on the day that I took the screenshot, this was the, you know, main page on the Explore tab. Then I made a new account. I logged in. I followed some people and added a bunch of likes. You know, and you can see a clear trend in color and theme, you know, style, etc. And then my Explore tab looked like this shortly thereafter. And so you can see that this is very different than this, you know, and this is much more like this than this. So you can kind of see, again, it's not that there is nothing in here, but that I had only interacted with the platform for about an hour at this point before it started to like really attune itself to the stuff that I like. And so going back to the art, architecture, and design competencies, thinking about not the like, where do you go questions, but the reflective questions. How are research and creative processes intertwined and informed for you personally? How do your search habits allow for discovery of new ideas? In what ways have you examined your own worldviews, assumptions, biases through collaborative and reflective practice? And in talking to Dan about this talk, Dan shared with me an email that he got in 2004 that he actually uses to kind of frame this sort of reflective question about what inspires you with students, Dan.
You know it's 2004 because my Hotmail account sent an email to an AOL account.
Sure, yep.
So, so this is an email that I actually received from Bill Allard, who is a photographer with National Geographic magazine. I was in photography school at the time. We had to create a portfolio and send it out to any number of places. I had one extra portfolio left and I was like, shot in the dark, let's send it to Bill. I call him Bill because we're on a first name basis. So anyway, I sent it and then I got this email back like a couple weeks later. And the thing that really struck me about this email is, he, said nice things, that he thought that my work was technically sound, but then he says, you need to make pictures that reflect a vision that is yours in some special way. And that takes a lot of work and thought and dedication. I'm not sure what photographers you look at or which painters or what you read or what music you listen to, but all those things are going to make your photographs reflect who you are. And this blew my mind because it had never occurred to me that as a photographer, it mattered what music I listened to, right? And that would come through in my photography. So this is something I bring up to students all the time because like Maggie was saying, if my student is really interested and wants to become a concept artist, all they want to do is look at concept art and all that they want to talk about is concept art. And the concept artists that are out there working in the field, like that's not what they grew up looking at because concept art wasn't even really like a thing, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Certainly not like it is now. So anyway, like that was really kind of the way that I was trying to connect with them, right? Like, who is Anime Fanboy 97? That's great that you like their work, but like let's also branch out a little bit because Bill Allard said so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we planned this research workshop. Dan introduced the assignment at the beginning of class, and we watched Mona Lisa descending staircase together. And so the approach that we took in the workshop was pretty simple given this framing. And so the framework for visual literacy in higher education, Anna shared a link to that when this sort of call for talks went out. And it's still in draft form. It's actually draft 3 will be out shortly, probably after we meet again next week. So it can move for approval by the ACRL board after it moves from the Information Literacy Frameworks and Standards Committee. But so here are 3 different knowledge practices or dispositions. All of these are prefaced by learners who are developing their visual literacy abilities. But so I took these as examples of the kinds of things that I was thinking about going into the workshop, thinking about the way that algorithms influence what we see and that there are kind of hidden factors behind those algorithms on social media platforms. That if you are going to use social media as a place to look for inspiration or discover new work, that you might want to compare what you're seeing to other places and think about canon, authority, structure, system, etc. And that appreciate creativity and inquiry can be inspired both through digital and analog environments through searching and browsing. Okay. So the lesson plan was kind of just 4 simple points. We asked students to share their current strategies for finding, discovering new to them artists, reference images, general inspiration. And so we use that as a kind of launch pad to discuss and reflect on together the role of algorithms in influencing what we see online and what that means for our development as artists. And as I have here on the right, Dan and I participated in this conversation, sort of modeling how it impacts us and thinking about research as part of artistic work. And so I have a link there to the whole class slides, and I'll get back to that in a second. But here is a screenshot of the poll. This is Mentimeter. So I asked them, how do you normally discover new to you artists? And so you see a lot of Google there, but also Instagram for you, recommendations on social media, through social media or based on a particular genre of art, Twitter or YouTube, social media or peers recommendations, etc. So also Google, I'm not sure if they meant Google Images or Google websites or what, but we kind of talked through all of this together. So after we kind of had a reflective conversation going in, the idea was providing them with concrete ideas for exploring contemporary art made by established artists working in styles, media, and themes we, as in the class together, through searching and browsing. And then we used kind of an unstructured open time for students to test out different approaches and practice new strategies in class. And I just want to note that Dan collaboratively negotiated the criteria for what contemporary art and established artists meant with students as a class, because they had questions about like, well, what if I just do use this artist from ArtStation? How is that different than somebody who has had a museum exhibition, and sort of talking through these disciplinary specific kinds of markers of authority and expertise, but also different commercial factors and things. Ultimately trying to get them as close to something that they like, while also kind of pushing back about their hesitation to keep exploring, because we would also see somebody open up a website, start to browse, and be like, okay, this is fine, and it's like, do you really like this? What about this do you like?
They need to at least have a name more than just a username.
Yeah. So this is these are kind of like 3 pointers that I use with students when I'm talking about artistic research practice, or creative research practice, or practice-based research, or it goes by many different names. But that you need to intentionally make time for research as an artist. Think about what you're reading, writing, looking, listening, talking, thinking. Those are all missing. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the part of speech. Reflecting and making mistakes into your art making. And then also think about what you can be doing to find things besides browsing your feed. Be curious, be open-minded, force yourself out of our comfort zones, or forcing ourselves out of our comfort zones can be a way to find new ideas, breakthrough, and processes and products. And so the actual slides themselves, also reflecting on those examples across multiple platforms. So what are we finding on a museum website versus what are we finding on Artsy or Hyperallergic, versus Wikipedia? What are these different tools good for? What's missing? Who's not in the library catalog? Thinking about that as well. Okay, so now we'll look at some student work examples, and then screen a not entirely finalized cut, I think, of the film, which is 3 minutes. So here is an artist, some examples of Amy Beeger's work, which the student discovered on, I think, Artsy. And here is the student's interpretation of that artist's work in the student's, style.
Yeah, and I think Caroline did a great job of, again, like matching, the color palette and also the content, but still making it her own piece.
Yeah. And also I remember Caroline was one of the first people to get the ratio of the image right the first time. But yes, she was talking about how Amy is very mythology inspired, and that she kind of wanted this to look like classical sculpture. So then here's some work by Sol Calero, a contemporary artist. And here is Una's interpretation of that. And I love this a lot. with the, skateboard and Nintendo Switch and, Doc Martin, etc.
And again, an image that Una would never have drawn otherwise.
Yes. Then we have David Hockney, a very famous contemporary painter, but who the student genuinely was not familiar with. And Kelly's interpretation of David Hockney. And then someone that I don't know this artist at all, but I have spent countless hours kind of browsing through his work since then, Victor Castillo. And then here's Danny Wilson's very amazing take on that. Kind of interpreting the character, but also the kind of like thematic, like scary kind of like a children's story type thing. Okay, so we're just gonna play for you the video here, and hopefully you can hear the audio because a student composed this. And then there's about a minute of credits, which I hope when this is published, maybe I can send it out to everyone so you can go through the credits on your own. But we want to save time for Mackenzie also. So just lastly, some kind of closing ideas. So, as librarians, we are used to talking about algorithms in terms of search results, bias, representation, discrimination in decision making, about like credit card, lending and things like that, but maybe less in terms of inspiration. As art librarians, kind of the base level learning outcome sometimes of getting students into the library is getting them outside of the studio environment, helps them think about the library as another part of their creative practice. That we use this class as an opportunity to, again, emphasize you can and should take inspiration from people working outside of your preferred style and even medium. That if we think of feedback and critique extending to process and not just final product, that it also makes sense to include students' research processes in critique. And so thinking about pushing students to try different strategies and not just go with the first thing that they saw, where they're like, this is fine. That observing students browsing and searching allowed us to do that when they weren't genuinely exploring and considering options. And then as a bonus, always, this is a bonus for me, students have come back and emailed me independently with questions, not even necessarily related to other assignments and courses, but also just their work in general and how can they find things that they're interested in, or that, you know, they have questions about that will inform their work. So thank you very much for having us. And here are credits for those images by artists who I did not get permission from to put in here. So thank you, David Hocking. Okay. And that's it for us. Anything else, Dan, that you wanted to share?
I don't think so, other than I think that the outcome really exceeded even the expectations that I had for the project. And I think that really getting them out of their initial comfort zone and having them like do the research improved ultimately what came out of this assignment.
I'm just looking at the chat. Yeah, everyone loves the student work. It is amazing. And let's pass the mic over to Mackenzie, and then maybe at the end take questions, all of us, all three of us, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay.
Mackenzie, are you good to go?
I think I am.
Okay. All right. I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Yeah, let me see. And Maggie, I'm glad David Hockney is going to be making more than one appearance today, so we're on the same page. Can everyone see the screen okay before I get started? Awesome. So my name is Mackenzie Salisbury. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the information literacy librarian at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. And what I'm going to be talking about today is artist appropriation. Is any single piece of art original? So a lot of similar ideas, I think, overlap with what Maggie and Dan were talking about earlier. I do want to say ahead of time, this lesson plan was developed with a former colleague of mine, Allison Rollins, who's amazing. So I want to give her fair props as well. SEAC occupies the lands that the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations have always lived on. We encourage people to learn about current initiatives happening through the Tri-Nations Youth Council. I can put a link in the chat later. I also want to give a big shout out to my colleague Alex, who's on this call. She does amazing work with our Land Back Committee, who's been working to come up with resources about how to create meaningful land acknowledgements. And so you can email me if you're interested in any of that. All right, so what is this workshop about? So we use Instagram a lot in instruction. I find it is a place and a space students already are. Although I will say more recently in speaking with students, also Pinterest, which is very odd as like an elder millennial to hear, but whatever. And so we really use Instagram as kind of a jumping off point to think about this idea of what is original. And so this was something that has come up a lot in art school, as you might imagine, people being very concerned with being original and what that means. But it's also meant to be a session that really introduces students to librarians while also getting their minds to kind of think about visual literacy without calling it that. Should also say this session typically happens in tandem with a regular, what we would all consider one shot. It usually happens beforehand and in their classroom. So I'm going to their classroom and we really, this is more of like a discussion, small group based assignment, but I find that not being in the library is actually really helpful because students are kind of overwhelmed immediately and they kind of get to know me or my other colleagues who have done this as people beforehand. And so that really helps as well. I should also say I've only done this with freshmen. So I think I would probably tweak this for a different level of student, but for freshmen, it's been really successful. So I definitely have been thinking about the visual literacy framework. These are kind of the three frames that I think this session in different ways kind of these appear. So learners participate in changing visual information landscape. Learners perceive visuals as communicating information, and learners practice visual discernment and criticality. So what is the overview of this lesson? So we use an account called Who's Who. Anyone just really quickly in the chat or otherwise, is anyone familiar with this account? I'm curious. Hand raise. No? Okay, I'm gonna put a link in the chat and you will all thank me later. No, just kidding. So Who's Who is an Instagram account that essentially pairs 2 or more images that are visually similar. And the poster, the person that posts these, gives very, very limited information, such as, and by limited information, I mean just the artist names, and they do not tell us who is who, just like the play on the account name, obviously. So I came across this years ago. I thought it was a really interesting project. And so what we do is we use this account to, in kind of a workshop style, talk about visual literacy elements, as well as this idea of what is original, what makes something original, ideas around appropriation, attribution, remix. And then we also talk about some other kind of what I would consider more interesting topics when it comes to art and the information landscape. So where we start is I usually pick one image from the Who's Who account, whatever I'm feeling interested in that day. And as a class, we really talk about what things are visually similar and what are different. And sometimes I have them use this Venn diagram. It really depends on the time constraints that we have as a class and how many students there are. But I find that just this simple activity of like having them like shout out, like what are some things that are similar, what are some things that are different, really starts to get them to look at, do some like close looking almost when it comes to the images. And I think I also should say, when I show them the Who's Who account for this part, I only show them the image. I don't show them the names of the artists, and I don't show them any comments, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. So this is one of my more favorite images here. It's a meme, which meme art is actually not on here a lot, which is interesting. But so after we have kind of a long discussion about similarities, differences, and they do a pretty good job of really getting into the weeds on this. Then what we do is we have them work in small groups, and they select a pair of images that I've already kind of generated from like a deck. I usually use, I have like physical cards for when we're in person, and I also made a digital deck as well. And I have them select one set of images, and then I ask them to do what we call rapid research. When I say rapid research, I basically say, without knowing anything, I want you all to, in the same way that Maggie was talking about, how would you research this if you were on your own? And so I give them about like 5 to 7 minutes to research both images, and I have them try to find out as much as they can about each, including which is which, as well as if they can find any other information. So, you know, which one came first, being this kind of the anchoring piece of this whole thing, talking about what is original, if it came first or second. And then I also have a number of other questions on a worksheet that I have them work through. So the questions I have them consider, we talk a lot about language and what terms they would use to categorize the pieces in relationship to each other. And so I've given them kind of a long list of synonyms essentially, and I have them select as many or as few as they think are relevant. I asked them to talk about the strategies that they used. A lot of people use like Google image reverse search, right? I asked them what they were surprised by. Sometimes students aren't able to identify one or the other, which is always really interesting. I also asked them to choose, like based on their thoughts, which one is the most original, and then to kind of justify why they're making that choice. I asked them questions about context. So where do you think this was intended to live, in a home or studio or museum? And then we kind of get into what I think is the more interesting piece, which is talking about, how does viewing art on Instagram change your relationship to this work? Is it more valuable or less, more accessible, less precious? And how does overall technology impact art? I think one of the things that we don't talk a lot about is how Instagram has really like expanded access, but also a lot of images are not meant to be seen in those spaces. And so how does that change not only our relationship with art, but like when you're seeing these two images next to each other, how does that change whether or not you think something's original, or if it's, you know, remixed, or if it's a homage, right? And then last, if this work is well known, what norms might the first work have challenged based on the time period of when it was made? Does a later work challenge similar ideas? So when there is like a very clear, some of the pairs have a very clear one is pointing to another. And so how does that work exactly? And so I give them a pretty long amount of time. It's about 15 minutes. And then I have each group kind of report out on each. And I will say some of the things that have been more surprising in terms of what has come out of some of this, the value of art and commodity. So a lot of students, you know, when we talk about, and actually I might have taken the David Hockney out of here. Anyways, now that I'm saying that, there was a David Hockney and then a more contemporary artist who is clearly making reference to Hockney's work and puts people of color or people from different socioeconomic backgrounds in place of the figures that David Hockney has had in his paintings. Anyway, so we talk a lot about, or students end up talking about art as commodity, right? And so this idea of reproducing and how that plays a role. Comment culture comes up a lot, as you might imagine. If I go back really quickly, this image here, right? So somebody's talking about ew, meme art, and like there's a whole conversation when I use this artwork, like is meme art? What is the purpose of this in remix? Like how does that change the meaning of the work, right? We also talk about copyright a lot, how it's really difficult to enforce copyright on the internet. We also end up talking a lot about content creators versus artists and this kind of new conversation around how that's changed all kinds of things in the art world. So what the differences and similarities are, but also how those tags or titles really change the way that traditional institutions see and value art. We talk about image quality, which I'm always super fascinated by. Context. So one of my favorite pairs is two images, and they are very, very similar. But then once you do some further research, you realize one is at a much, much larger scale than the other. And so we talk a little bit about that. We've also talked a lot about artists that only make art on Instagram and how that's different than artwork that is made and then somebody is, you know, reproducing it on Instagram. So like, what are the differences with that? Similarly, medium is the message. We've talked about museum culture as a part of these kind of outcomes. And then art and information as experience. So this idea of scrolling endlessly and what that really means and how that changes our perceptions with the art that we experience. And I will say the faculty feedback on this has been really, really great. So we do a little survey at the end of the year, and they said this is a great workshop because it taps into students' interests in social media and the questions they have about originality and appropriation in the digital age. And rather than answering it, it opens new critical questions. So a lot of the outcomes of this class are less tangible because they're more in conversation format. But I will say, I feel like they're probably the most in-depth conversations I've had with students, as well as kind of the richest, especially when you have two students that are really kind of like, not fighting, but they're like very passionate about their stance on whether or not something is original or not. I think in particular, the date thing that comes up is very interesting. I should also say I've started starting class with a video. Sometimes I do this, again, based on time. There's a TEDx talk by an artist who makes poetry using newspaper clippings. So he does like redacted, like blackout poems essentially. And he talks about his process and how he arrived at that. And speaking to Maggie and Dan's presentation, this idea of like, you know, we're all kind of, we are a mix of so many other things, not just the art that we're making. And that's also sometimes helped to kind of like reframe this question of what is original before we even get into the Instagram piece. And then I tend to use the ACRL frames when I'm thinking about any kind of alignment. So authority is constricted and contextual. So students understand the importance of giving credit of the original ideas of others through proper citation and attribution. It's surprising how many times that the concept of copyright comes up in this conversation, and kind of in weird ways. Like some of the images that the poster uses are like have been on like magazine covers, right? And so we talk a little bit about like what is it? How do you properly cite something that is has been reproduced so many times in different ways, and does that devalue it for the artist, right? It's just an interesting kind of segment that I hadn't thought about. Information as value, so students will learn to formulate questions for research based on information gaps or re-examining of existing possibly conflicting information. This one comes up. It's surprising how many students cannot find information about some of these images. And I will say, like, some of them are very well-known artists, but others are much more obscure. But it's a really, and this person's been doing more like triptychs or even four sometimes, where they're showing different information. And then as a side note, and I mentioned to everybody earlier at the beginning of this call, so I've been using this account for a while now in classes, and I have been trying desperately to get the person who runs this account to like interact with me, because I'm like, I want to know like who you are and like why you started this, right? There's no information on this page about you. And so every semester for 5 semesters, I've been sending them a DM from the library Instagram. And so on a whim earlier this week, I was like, I'm just going to send it from my personal Instagram, like see what happens. And so I wrote them, and they said, I was like, hi, you know, I'm Mackenzie. I've been using this account. I'd love to chat with you. And they're like, yeah, were you like cool to come, you know, do some conversations via DM? And I was like, yes, absolutely. I have so many questions. So basically I was like, who are you? Why did you start this? And they said, quote, it was a tough decision to start this account because I knew once things were underway that people would interpret it in their own way, i.e. calling out copycats. My motivation in the beginning was to illustrate more of a phenomenon, like 2 artists working unaware of one of each other's work, yet producing similarities. And then he says, the posts I have obviously open to include known appropriations where I deliberately ignore the context. It's interesting to see them side by side, and also interesting that followers still get upset in the comments, which is super true. And then we talked about some other things, and then they also told me that they're an SAAC alum, which is lovely, though they have not given me their name, and I'm not going to push for it. But it was just an interesting kind of aspect to see what this, like how this person started and what their intentions were, but then also kind of, because students ask all the time, like, who is this, right? And I'm like, listen, I've tried to find out and I've had no luck. But yeah, I guess that's all I had for this. I should also say this is one of those lesson plans that I feel like I'm always tweaking slightly, and so I'm really up for feedback or input, or if anyone wants to collaborate on making this into something better than it is, I would be super up for that. Yeah, does anyone have, that's I think it for me. I was not paying attention to the chat, so if anyone had questions.
Yeah, so we were sort of gonna hold questions for everybody till the end of both presentations. So I think now we've probably got a few moments, but also first of all, thank you. Thank you, Mackenzie and Maggie and Dan. Those were really awesome and some really cool ideas and lesson plans. So yeah, like I said, we've got a couple minutes now for questions and also for like silent Zoom applause. I think I saw, gotta scroll back up, a question for Maggie and Dan about the video, saying the transitions are great. Did the students plan this? I don't know if either of you could talk about that.
Dan can.
Sure. So they planned it over the course of the assignment, right? So the first 2 weeks were the research phase, and then also creating that first image phase. And the first image was, so like each of the different transitions kind of landed on a separate image, right? And so each of those was created by an artist, and then they took that image that was theirs and they handed it to the person that was after them in line. And then that person had to go from, I'm sorry, before them in line, so then that person had to go from that image, the other student's image, to their image, right? And so like that was the transitional animation that was taking place. And so each student had to find a way to go from their peer's image to their own. And, you know, again, Joan spent 2 years animating hers, and we spent 2 weeks on the prep and then 3 weeks on the animation. So they work quickly.
Yeah, and you, on the day that the presentations were, you also worked together to put them in order, right? Like it was a class discussion.
Yes, so
to order them. Yeah.
That was a big part of the process too, is right, like figuring out like what's the order. And so we were looking at, you know, arranging things based on content or based on, you know, color or contrast, or there were a lot of different ways that we kind of, you know, did that. And it's a collaborative process. So, you know, I mean, there were, and I think some students were very particular about what, since they were having to like handle, you know, someone else's image. I mean, that's kind of a personal thing. So, but they were great. And then we had a student from the School of Music who volunteered to write the music for it. And we're still working on like a final title sequence, but.
Oh, and I also just want to, Dan, tell them about what it's called and how you guys are approaching that for the next time you teach this class.
Sure. So because, you know, we were basing it on Mona Lisa Descending the Staircase, I titled this one Vitruvian Man Mowing the Lawn. And then I have given this group the opportunity to come up with the best title they can for then the next student group. And then that will be an honor that kind of gets passed on down the line. And we have a really great title, but I don't have it in front of me. And
and it was long, I remember.
I didn't get it wrong, but it's something to the effect of like stepmom driving the kids home from Chuck E. Cheese after a really long day, or something to that effect. But it's magnificent. So
Wonderful. That's awesome. Any other questions? Got like a couple minutes still. I know, so I'm just like broadly interested in, you know, hearing whatever you might be thinking as far as repeating, and this goes for everybody, or future like alterations, iterations. But if anybody else's questions come up, feel free to jump those in the queue. Just in case anyone is calling in, can't see chat, the full title of the next round is The Virgin and Childless Saint Anne Driving to Chuck E. Cheese on Tuesday evening after a long day at the shopping plaza, which is beautiful.
I have a quick question about that. So are you going to give them the title before or after?
I don't know.
That might like shape like an algorithm. It might like shape the work that they make, right? Not to like be really meta on for everyone.
So I gave them this title ahead of time. I don't know.
It'll all be like Pieta if you do that.
I think that, you know, again, the idea of sourcing out the artists, right? Like that's because no one knows who the other artists are that other people are searching for, right? So like the content that we got back at the presentation of the artist was like varied greatly. So I mean, I think that, and I don't know how much of it was actually driven by the title of the film, but I think this is a much more like profound title. So maybe it would impact.
I do have one question. First of all, so a thank you to the presenters, but you know, I third and fifth. But any thoughts on incorporating tools like Tropy into these lessons?
I feel like Alex O'Keefe is probably screaming in her office right now because she does all that work. Yeah,
The question is from Alex O'Keefe, so.
Yeah, we share a brain. It's fine. So yes, I'm sure would be my question. I don't know.
I don't use, so I also work with public history and museum studies. And so I use Tropy with them. In the Studio Art Foundations class, I talked about it in the lightning talk last year. Google Keep, just because it has a sort of like you don't have to install a separate program like Tropy. You can capture as much or as little metadata as you want. You can sort of annotate things with, and move it around, but it's not necessarily meant to be like research data management like Tropy is. But I could see, Google Keep is just, well, we're also a Google campus. So like students have Google Slides, Google Drive, Gmail, etc. So they have a Google Keep account already. They just have to go to keep.google.com. Kai is asking about Tropy. Alex, if you want, or I can talk about Tropy. Tropy it's by the same people at, I always forget what university it is, that do Zotero. So Zotero is for bibliographic metadata. Tropy is for images. And so the idea is like you are a history researcher who's going to an archive, and you're funded and you're only going to be there for one day, and you take a bazillion pictures on your phone of different documents and things. And so it's a way to organize those so that you don't just have like a bunch of thank you, George Mason. You don't have a bunch of images with no kind of context or organization or way to think about them in relation to each other, etc. Omeka also, but it's I think one of the newer tools, and so it's kind of picking up steam. And you can use Zotero for images, but not in the same way. And that Zotero actually doesn't have a great form for archival, like manuscript kind of documents. Like the form doesn't go as far as saying like what archive is this, what box, what folder, kind of thing, which comes up in that kind of in most. I'm going to stop talking. Never mind. It doesn't matter.
No, that's great. I just learned about Tropy for the first time. So.
Like Zotero, I mean, it's something you have to install and make an account and things like that, which is probably why I haven't thought about using it with studio art students, but I can see MFA students probably getting into it, who are working on longer term kind of theses and stuff.
Awesome. So I think if there are maybe one more question, we could take that. And otherwise, and I don't know if we wanted to sort of move into our last announcement. So if someone has a question, feel free to interrupt me at any point. But yeah, so first of all, I think that's what we have for the presentations. So I wanted to say thank you again. That was wonderful. I loved these projects. And thank you everybody for coming, especially I know we're getting to the end of semester, everyone's sort of exhausted. But before everybody headed out, I wanted to mention, so Anna and I have been co-coordinators of the SIG for a number of years now. I don't remember how many. And we would like to step down and make room for other people to step up. Could be any number, could be just one coordinator, could work in a team again like this. So we wanted to put that idea out there. Our plan is to ideally rotate in a new coordinator or coordinators at the annual meeting in the spring. So we wanted to have that out there. You can think about it if you think you are interested, or if you know someone else who you could encourage to become interested. definitely reach out to them, or of course, reach out to us if you would like to consider stepping up into that coordinator position. And we can also answer any questions you might have about what's involved, what it's like. Obviously, you're all a pretty great group of people, so it's a pretty enjoyable, low-key endeavor and a good way to get a lot more information and meet a lot of folks. Oh, thank you. We're not leaving. We're just, switching some folks out so new people can have a chance. Thank you. All right. Because it looks like there were no more questions. So, everyone's moving around. Anna, is there anything else that we need to touch on, or?
I think we're good. Thank you all for coming.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Nice to see
Thanks for
everybody.
having us. It was nice to meet
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you so much, all the presenters.
See you all in Chicago. Oh God.
I haven't
It's
bought my
happening way
plane
too
ticket
fast.
yet. I